I really think to start out, just play with as many of them as you can.
But I think your question is a little bit more around where do we want people to start with using or getting involved with generative AI today, which is a little bit different of a question. And I'm not sure that we have one great answer for that, but some of the basic skills that we emphasize that we think everyone can learn: prompting and evaluating the results of different prompts and different models on a specific task.
I think a lot of it is just playing with these tools, playing with Gemini, playing with Claude, playing with ChatGPT. It can be really fun to play with. And I think a lot of people sometimes can be a little hesitant to get started because they don't fully know what use cases or how they want to prompt it. And I think just getting used to playing with them is a really great place to start. But I really think to start out, just play with as many of them as you can, see what you like, what you don't, and what works for you.
And I think it might be worth adding that you can get to Gemini and you get allowance daily.
Yeah, a lot of these are free. Or there is like a free tier for, I think, most of the really good ones out there.
So no excuse. Go and play.
There's really no excuse.
This is me, Miko again, and today I bring you two amazing guests. They're the co-authors of the Introduction to Generative AI, manning 2nd edition already. And their names are Numa Dhamani, she's the head of machine learning at iVerify, and Maggie Engler, member of technical staff, Microsoft AI. So not even 2 years after the 1st edition, right? Fast-moving field, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It's been, I think, both great to be in the field right now, but also a little nerve-wracking with how fast everything is moving and changing.
Yes, our editor reached out about doing a 2nd edition, as you mentioned, a year, maybe a year and a half after the first one came out. And we realized that there actually had been so many advances and so many new ways in which people were using AI that we wanted to talk about. And so took the opportunity to update a lot of our existing material and introduce some new material.
Wow. How much do you think percentage-wise changed in that short year between when you started the 2nd edition and the first one?
I think that maybe when the 1st edition came out, a lot of people were still asking, like, what is generative AI? How does it actually work? And when we were working on the 2nd edition, there was like a field around it and had transformed and evolved quite a bit in the past 2 years. I don't know if I can put a percentage on it. I think that's hard to say.
Sure.
But I do think we moved away from thinking about generative AI as this idea that people can just like talk to chatbots to these systems that we are now using in our daily lives.
Yeah, and actually one of the big challenges we did go through, so I likewise don't know exactly the percentage that's new, but we did go through every single section to ensure that it was either up to date or still applicable. And one of the challenges, even this week as we're going through our final copy editing, is that the specific results on benchmarks and things like that always change. And so one of the things that we emphasize is really just understanding how to even interpret these new stories or new numbers that are flying at you from different headlines. So we're hoping to equip readers to be able to understand these changes, even though we're out of necessity not going to always have the latest and greatest in a published book.
Yeah, but that's not a bad gig, right? If you have to update the book perpetually now every year, that's really good. How did you meet? You obviously have chemistry between you. It's like almost like getting married if you're going to spend like a year or two writing a book with somebody. What's your story?
We actually met working together. So we've actually worked at 2 places together. So we've known each other for quite some time. It's also really funny that you bring up that it's like getting married together, because I do think one of the first things that our publisher told us was that writing a book is like having a baby together. So we're about to bring our 2nd child out into the world hopefully soon.
Yeah, I think that's pretty apt. And now you're responsible for the 3rd and 4th and 5th edition. No pressure.
We'll see how that goes.
Was there anything in particular that made you think, okay, yeah, it's time? Because the stuff we all see kind of probably most of the people listening to this at least attempted to keep on top of AI, and then they see all these models coming out and things change and the leaderboard looks different every other week, and at some point you give up and try to find someone to tell you what's important. And I'm guessing that's you. Was there like anything in particular that told you, okay, yeah, this is no longer the book that we needed, we need to update it?
So I do think it was like prompted by our editor reaching out saying that, hey, maybe it's time. And I remember Maggie and I sat together and we're like, is it really time to update the book? Like, it's only been a year. But while we were sitting down and like having that conversation, I think we realized how much that field has shifted. And I think the second edition is really a reflection of that shift. I think when we had first started writing the book, it was like a few months after ChatGPT had come out. I think ChatGPT came out November of, and we had 22, and we started writing like early 2023. So at the time, it felt like GenAI was maybe an experiment. A lot of people were testing it out. People were excited about it, but weren't really sure what it was or where it's going. And I think since then, it has really become a part of people's lives and how people now work and how people use certain tools. So I do think in a lot of ways, it's a reflection of how that has shifted in the past 2 years. And then, of course, even just different models and different benchmarks. And we have seen technical shifts as well. Like, we've moved away from these single chat interfaces to actual systems and agents. And we have seen a lot of, I think, technical updates as well over the last 2 years, which felt important to incorporate into that novel as well.
I don't know that there was a single moment we thought that this means that it's time, but I do think the two biggest breakthroughs that we definitely wanted to cover that were alluded to, but maybe not really explored in the first edition. The first one being agents, because we've seen so many applications and wider scale adoption of things like coding agents in the industry. And then the second one was reasoning models, because O1 was released after the publication of the first edition. And we thought that this new type of scaling and the new paradigm of the reasoning models was something that it would be worthwhile to include and introduce to readers.
I was going to ask you something else, but now I have to ask you this. Okay, so tell us about this. The agents. When you speak to people about agents, they are either going to solve all of our problems, or they're basically a bunch of nonsense that can't work. What has changed in the last couple of years that made you believe, okay, the agents is going to be the next thing?
So I would say we're not actually totally, or the most bullish across the board, as bullish or excited as some people are. I think it's very important to discuss because of how present these agents have been, both in, again, industry and development, and in the broader conversation. All these different workflows are going to be fully agentic and so on. So we do definitely focus on not only what they can accomplish today, but also where they're falling short today and why it may take longer than some folks expect for fully automated workflows in a lot of cases. But that said, I think some of the developments in that spend that we talk about are general tool use capabilities and the improvement in those areas, as well as systems like Anthropic's Model Context Protocol, MCP, and just the standardization of different tool calls and different systems to actually empower these AI models to do more things, and building sort of the underlying infrastructure for agents to work. So despite that, we do call out that there are still model limitations. I think that infra development and the community of development around that means that there is a clear path towards these agents doing more and more things.
Yeah, I think we highlight essentially a lot of the promise of these tools, and that's been an ongoing theme around the book, where for a lot of these tools and capabilities, we talk a lot about, here is the promise, here's where we think that this could go if it is done well as here's some limitations and where it falls short, right? So we did something very similar with the agents like Enlight.
Are there any particular scenarios or domains or use cases where you're more bullish than the others?
It's a hard question. I think tool use is definitely one of them. I think we've seen some really good examples of tool use already. And by tool use, I just mean an agent interacting with its environment to use a tool like a calculator or doing like a web search, so having tools at its disposal. I think we've seen some really good examples of it doing that, especially when it's constrained to a specific like narrow problem. But yeah, I think that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, I think, and we talk a lot about coding in the book as well, but definitely systems like Claude Code, I think, have shown a huge amount of capability in essentially programming agents. And part of that, as we talk about, is the ability to be able to verify the results of a task, because once you can do things like, or once you have a task like a coding problem where there are maybe some set of tests and you can say, as soon as these tests are passing, that means that this is a functional solution. In domains where those types of problems exist, I think is where we have seen, for maybe obvious reasons, the most progress. It's easiest to progress against those as you can quickly iterate and check solutions. And yeah, coding, I think, is the other one that we do talk about quite a bit, especially, again, because of the popularity of that use case in particular.
That makes sense. One of the things that I picked up in your little abstract on money.com was the kind of three horsemen of apocalypse, right? The doomsaying, the hype, and the misinformation. And I believe you tackled that in the book. What's your take in a nutshell on those?
Yeah, I think a really big reason why we wanted to write the first edition was because we were seeing a lot of hype and we were seeing a lot of potential misinformation about how these tools are used, how they work, how people can use them. And what we really wanted to do was provide a balanced, a realistic narrative where people could use that at their disposal to understand this is how they work, this is their promise, this is their limitations, and be able to make critical decisions themselves, as opposed to giving into a lot of the hype and fear that we see in the media every day. And I think we've kept that theme. We've kept that theme for the second edition as well, where I do think is a fairly balanced narrative. Like Maggie said, we're not super bullish on things like agents. We do think there is promise. We do think there's some good use cases for it. But at the same time, we can't actually outsource everything to agents just yet, and we probably shouldn't. So we talk a lot about that, and I think take a very nuanced and balanced approach to a lot of these technologies.
I think that does summarize the approach very well. We also do talk in our appendix chapter some of the different, almost cultural rifts right now in AI, because it does seem, to your point about doomsaying, there is a cohort of people who either think that AI is useless enough to be a massive waste of money or resources. And on the flip side, those who believe that it is so powerful that it will either save the world or destroy the world. And I think that, again, I would describe these debates at times almost as ideological. And so one of the things that we discuss, in addition to more of the technical frameworks and how to think about these systems from an engineering perspective, is just the broader context, both socially, legally, and ethically.
Let's talk about that legal aspect. I think that's increasingly interesting, from like the massive lawsuits from the large magazines to Japanese video games companies now asking politely OpenAI to maybe stop using their IP. How do you think that changed the last couple of years? I'm guessing it went from like Wild West to maybe we're converging onto something. Where are we today and where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think 2 years ago, the conversation was maybe still about very like voluntary pledges and like corporate responsibility statements. And we're starting to maybe see, the first wave of just binding frameworks start to take shape. So like we see the EU AI Act has been adopted. It's now moving towards implementation. In the US, I think the landscape is maybe more shaped by like agency guidance and state level privacy laws and maybe more like sector specific oversight. But we are starting to see some sort of frameworks take shape a little bit. And what's really interesting is we're starting to converge on a lot of the similar priorities now. So we're seeing a lot of things around transparency, safety testing, accountability, and maybe start to get to an outline of what a baseline could look like for responsible AI development.
And just to add about some of the cases that you mentioned, because a lot of those were the intellectual property and copyright discussions, I think in that sense, we are almost still in the Wild West. But having said that, since the time of the first edition, a lot of these lawsuits have progressed, or new models have created new conflicts. But we even saw this recently with the release of Sora 2, where OpenAI initially had said, oh, copyright owners, if you are an anime studio, to your point, that has a specific character and you can opt out and get your characters removed sort of character by character. And then rights owners were understandably a bit upset by that because that's usually not how copyright works. And in that case, OpenAI reversed course within a few days of the initial release. And so I think there's still this negotiation between model developers and rights owners that should try to figure out potentially mutually beneficial solutions, which there may be cases that we just end up with large settlements and block lists and things like that. But one of the things that we also talk about in the book are some of these early attempts at licensing, or what does a rights sharing framework look like across model training, model development. We've seen Anthropic also pay out a huge settlement to a bunch of authors, which again, some people are happy about, some are not. But yeah, I do think this is an area that is beginning to unfold now and going to take a lot longer to reach a set of principles that applies more universally.
But as somebody who's in the trenches and understand how all of this works, how did they accidentally end up with a certain Japanese, Italian plumber in their data set? Are they just forgetting what they trained it on? Is that possible? I don't think it just emerged out of thin air. Or did it?
No, I think there's very little doubt that large-scale model developers are training on copyrighted material. I don't think this is controversial to say that is happening. Right. There are various challenges as to why that might be the case, even if you do try to say, oh, I really want to make sure that my model has never seen a specific Italian plumber. But when you're looking at the scale of data, the scale of images and videos that are getting ingested from such a broad variety of sources, it is very difficult to pre-select sort of a set of exclusions, and especially, again, if you don't know that until after the fact, if you're still determining what the specific policy should be.
We do talk a lot about this in our book, and we have an entire chapter just dedicated to trading data.
All you have to do is go to money.com and search for Introduction to Generative AI. Yeah, because I imagine even if you remove the actual copyrighted material, there's still going to be fan art and people wearing merch and all of that. Yeah, that's going to be much harder to get rid of, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so you can definitely be more or less cautious about the sources of the data, but copies of these artifacts appear all over. And so even if you're including data from the internet, it could be, a fan reproduction or just any type of unlabeled media.
It's not easy to be a $500 billion private company these days. So many hurdles. Okay, so let's talk about the introduction aspect of the Introduction to GenAI. How has the starting point shifted since the first edition? What did you use to recommend as a starting point that no longer applies, and what's new?
That's a great question. So the starting point for our readers is the same in that we hope that people who are just broadly familiar with generative AI systems, maybe they've used ChatGPT, maybe they've just heard about it, can still read the book and learn something. It does get into a little bit of technical details, which are more accessible if you have some type of either computer science or in some cases statistics background. But the goal is really to be generally and broadly accessible. But I think your question is a little bit more around where do we want people to start with using or getting involved with generative AI today, which is a little bit different of a question. And I'm not sure that we have one great answer for that, but some of the basic skills that we emphasize that we think everyone can learn: prompting and evaluating the results of different prompts and different models on a specific task?
I think a lot of it is just playing with these tools, playing with Gemini, playing with Claude, playing with ChatGPT. It can be really fun to play with. And I think a lot of people sometimes can be a little hesitant to get started because they don't fully know what use cases or how they want to prompt it. And I think just getting used to playing with them is a really great place to start. And once you do that, then you can maybe start to look into more like agentic systems like Claude Code if you are a developer, or start to build your own GPTs, or try to use like Perplexity with your own knowledge database or something of that sort. But I really think to start out, just play with as many of them as you can, see what you like, what you don't, and works for you.
And I think it might be worth adding that you can get to Gemini and you get allowance daily.
Yeah, a lot of these are free. Or there is like a free tier for, I think, most of the really good ones out there.
So no excuse. Go and play.
There's really no excuse.
Fair enough. What would you say surprised you the last couple of years? Some use cases that weren't a good fit for that became a good fit, or maybe the other way around. Something that initially looked promising that turned out terrible.
Honestly, I think a lot of these tools have really been good at things where you can just see a lot of patterns faster, right? Because I think that's really what they're designed to do. So for them to be really good at things like content drafting or coding actually makes a lot of sense because of the types of patterns you would see in those kinds of tasks. I think there have been use cases which I maybe wouldn't have been like my first thought to go for. So I know a lot of people will use it for things like shopping or like trying to figure out a good recipe or things like that. And it's been fun and interesting to see how people have used it. But I don't know if there's any use case that's been very surprising to me, Maggie.
The one that comes to mind that AI would be as impactful in as it has been is actually, I was just looking to see about the specific model name, and it looks like there's some tools from Google DeepMind. Alpha Evolve is one of them, but the domain is mathematics research, because the typical understanding of these models, and I think this is still true to a large extent, is that because they are effectively pattern matching, they can't produce output that is creative or that is novel. And I think one of the things that we've seen is actually as tools in the context of maybe brainstorming new directions or validating some different research hypotheses, they are actually useful, I think mostly in the sense of having a somewhat intelligent collaborator to endlessly ping notions off of. But all this to say that Terence Tao, a famous mathematician, and some other very high-profile mathematicians have found AI tools useful in their work. Again, not because they're better at this mathematics research, but because they're helpful accelerants in thinking through some of the problems.
Makes sense. I think for me, if I asked myself that question, it was the Triceratops test. Every time I asked my journey for a Triceratops, it would give me a T-Rex, and then one day it just started knowing other dinosaurs. So that was a breakthrough I was waiting for, and so is my son. Anyway.
Yes, on the flip side, and this actually has also gotten much better more recently, but if we're talking about early ones that we thought would be better, the text generation in images was so bad for so long, and I think still is a problem for a lot of models.
Yeah, Will Smith can eat spaghetti in a convincing manner now. All right, ladies, let's make some outrageous prediction for the future that will probably get outdated very quickly. I think the two that everybody wants to know about, and I have to ask you, are A, are we in an AI bubble? And B, where do you see all of this Gen AI stuff going in a year from now?
That's a great question. I can start with my guess. Again, not a
financial
financial
advice.
expert, not financial advice. Yes, thank you. I actually would not describe the current moment as an AI bubble. I would say perhaps a small bubble in the sense that I think that certainly certain stocks are overvalued, which I won't name. But I do think that this is like reflecting investor interest in a technology that is meaningfully going to change many industries. And so I think some of the growth that we've seen, or like crazy valuations of startups that are pre-product, I think that will start to flatten out. But I do think that the impact of AI in the economy will be very real. Yeah, between yes and no
Yeah.
answer on that first one. And then the second one in a year. See, a year, it's funny because that seems like such a short amount of time, but at the same time, like we've already seen how much can change in a year just based on the past year.
Yeah.
So some of the things that we talk about, again, we've mentioned agents a bunch of times, but I do think that we're going to see increasing automated workflows or things where people previously maybe used manually, then did things by asking a single model for an answer and plugged it in themselves, to maybe multi-agent systems or things where you're giving a model more of an open-ended task or a series of tasks and providing more of oversight rather than step-by-step involvement. But yeah, of course, it's hard to say.
I think I would agree with a lot of that. I think we're in a phase that has a lot of characteristics of it being a bubble, right? Maggie mentioned some of this, but there's a lot of investments. There's really high valuations. We're not seeing a lot of returns. There's a lot of speculation. But that being said, I don't think the whole field is going to collapse or that AI has no long-term value. I think what will most likely happen over the next year is we're going to see the valuations adjust. We will see a lot of the weaker players move away from this, but I think a lot of the core of AI will still be there and it will evolve. I think we'll move away from right now. There's, I think, just a lot of wild optimism everywhere, which is leading to these like bubble characteristics, I guess. But I think we'll actually move towards more metrics. I think the hype will be a little bit tempered. But I think the technology will actually just keep moving. And I do think we will see returns from it. So I don't actually think we are in a bubble. But I think, like Maggie mentioned, it'll probably be more like systems thinking versus tool thinking that we're seeing right now.
In many ways, exactly like the dot-com bubble, right? The internet itself turned out to be one of the...
I was about to say, so maybe it is, yeah, by
it's
that
a lot
definition,
of parallels,
it should be a bubble because obviously the internet was not a passing fad. But I do think a correction would be very reasonable. But yes, the interest and hype do reflect real value. But having said that, there are definitely cases of where I would expect to see market either correction or consolidation, perhaps.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And thank you for a balanced opinion. These are very rare these days. I appreciate when I see one. Okay, when is the book going to be ready?
We are, I think, about to send it to the printing press very soon. Our tentative publication date is January 28th. So it's coming out.
And for anybody not familiar with the MEEP program on Dhamani, I'm always forgetting, is it Dhamani Early Access program? But it lets you scan the book as it's being written, so you don't have to wait until it's fully ready. You can read it as it goes. Ladies, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
For anybody who wants to follow your adventure, what's the best way? Are you on LinkedIn, X?
You can find us both on LinkedIn.
At LinkedIn, and we actually have a Substack that we've just kicked off and started posting to.
What's it called?
And that link is...
Maggie grabs the link. It is nofailsafe.substack.com.
Thank you.
There you go. All right. Thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thank you.